When people talk about the artists who truly understood the impact of the Beatles, few names carry more weight than Bob Dylan. Long before critics began analyzing the band's cultural importance in universities, documentaries, and endless retrospectives, Dylan immediately recognized that something revolutionary was happening in popular music the moment he first heard the Beatles in the early 1960s. Among all the songs released by the Beatles, there was one track Dylan believed changed the direction of modern music forever. I Want to Hold Your Hand. At first glance, the song may seem surprisingly simple compared to the more experimental material the Beatles would later create on albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band or Abbey Road. But when I Want to Hold Your Hand exploded onto radios in 1963 and 1964, it sounded unlike anything else in popular music. The song arrived during a major cultural shift. Rock and roll already existed thanks to pioneers like Elvis Presley, yet much of mainstream pop still followed predictable formulas. Songs were often clean, straightforward, and carefully controlled by record labels. Then, suddenly, four young musicians from Liverpool appeared with an entirely different kind of energy. The Beatles did not simply sound young, they sounded alive. Their harmonies were tighter, their melodies sharper, and their songwriting carried a confidence that separated them from nearly every other act dominating the charts at the time. Even the rhythm of I Want to Hold Your Hand felt explosive compared to the safer pop records surrounding it. There was urgency in the performance, a kind of joyful intensity that immediately grabbed listeners. Dylan instantly noticed it. They were doing things nobody was doing. Their chords were outrageous, just outrageous, and their harmonies made it all valid. I knew they were pointing the direction of where music had to go. For Dylan, this was not simply another catchy pop song. He heard ambition hidden beneath the infectious melody. While many older listeners initially dismissed Beatlemania as teenage hysteria, Dylan recognized genuine musical innovation underneath the screaming crowds. That reaction becomes even more significant when considering who Bob Dylan was at the time. By the early 1960s, Dylan had already established himself as one of the most respected songwriters in American folk music. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind and The Times They Are Changin' had transformed him into the voice of a generation. His music carried political weight, poetic depth, and social commentary that many critics believed separated serious songwriting from ordinary pop music. Unlike many traditional folk musicians who looked down on pop acts, Dylan saw artistic potential in the Beatles almost immediately. That alone says a great deal about how powerful I Want to Hold Your Hand truly was. Dylan was not the type of artist who praised commercial music lightly. He understood songwriting on a deeper level than most musicians of his era, and he could hear that the Beatles were pushing popular music into new territory. Part of what impressed Dylan was the structure of the song itself. On the surface, the lyrics seem innocent and direct, a simple declaration of affection from one young person to another. Yet underneath that simplicity was a sophisticated musical construction. The chord changes moved with unusual energy, the vocal interplay between John Lennon and Paul McCartney felt seamless, and the production created a momentum that few artists had achieved before. Even the opening line of the song carried enormous impact. The way the Beatles launched directly into the melody without hesitation gave the track an immediate sense of excitement. It sounded modern, urgent, and completely different from the polished pop music many American listeners were used to hearing. For Dylan, this represented more than just musical success. It represented possibility. Before meeting Dylan, the Beatles were primarily focused on writing energetic love songs and radio-friendly hits. Tracks like She Loves You, Please Please Me, and From Me to You helped establish the group as global superstars, but their lyrical themes largely revolved around romance and youthful excitement. After spending time with Dylan in 1964, the band's songwriting began evolving into something far more introspective and poetic. Many fans and historians point to Dylan's influence as one of the key reasons why the Lennon and McCartney started pushing beyond conventional pop lyrics. Dylan introduced them to a more personal and literary style of songwriting, one that encouraged emotional vulnerability in abstract imagery. The transformation became visible almost immediately. Songs like Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, Nowhere Man, and In My Life revealed a level of emotional depth that likely would not have emerged in quite the same way without Dylan's example. Suddenly, Beatles songs were no longer only about teenage romance. They became reflective, surreal, philosophical, and deeply personal. At the same time, Dylan was inspired by the Beatles' musical freedom. Their willingness to blend genres and abandon traditional structures encouraged Dylan to move beyond the acoustic folk scene that had first made him famous. Not long after connecting with the Beatles, Dylan famously embraced electric instruments, shocking portions of the folk community in the process. The relationship between Dylan and the Beatles became one of the most important creative exchanges in music history. Both sides pushed each other forward. The Beatles absorbed Dylan's lyrical sophistication, while Dylan absorbed some of the Beatles' fearless musical experimentation and melodic confidence. It was not a one-sided influence. Instead, it became a rare moment where two world-changing artists elevated each other at exactly the right point in history. Still, despite all the artistic experimentation both sides would later embrace, Dylan never forgot the shock of hearing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" for the first time. That initial reaction remained important because Dylan understood something many people missed. Revolutions in music do not always announce themselves through complexity. Sometimes they arrive disguised as simple pop songs. Today, listeners often associate the Beatles' genius with later masterpieces like A Day in the Life, Strawberry Fields Forever, or Something. Those recordings are often praised for their experimentation, studio innovation, and emotional depth. But Dylan understood that the true revolution had already started years earlier with a 3-minute pop single. Without I Want to Hold Your Hand, there may never have been Sgt. Pepper, Revolver, or the psychedelic explosion that transformed rock music in the second half of the 1960s. The song opened the door. It proved that pop music could be commercially massive while still sounding musically inventive and emotionally exciting. That influence stretched far beyond the Beatles themselves. Countless musicians who came afterward adopted the same balance of melody, energy, and artistic ambition. From British rock bands of the late 1960s to modern indie artists decades later, the DNA of I Want to Hold Your Hand can still be heard throughout popular music. What sounded innocent on the surface carried an entirely new musical language underneath. The harmonies, the rhythm, the energy, and the confidence all pointed towards the future of rock music. Even Beatlemania itself became part of the transformation. The intense reaction from young audiences demonstrated that rock music was no longer a temporary trend. It had become a cultural force powerful enough to reshape fashion, language, youth identity, and eventually politics and art. Dylan saw all of that before many critics did. While others focused on the screaming fans and matching suits, Dylan listened closely to the music itself. He recognized that the Beatles were expanding the possibilities of what a pop group could achieve artistically. For Bob Dylan, I Want to Hold Your Hand was not just an early Beatles hit, it was the sound of popular music stepping into the future. It was the moment the old boundaries began disappearing. And in Dylan's eyes, it was the moment popular music changed forever.